This is now my second video investigating the official release of FSR 4, at least a version of it that supports int 8 rather than FP8 on RX 7000 series GPUs. That's the RDNA 3 architecture. Now, many people in the community have already been using a leaked build of FSR 4.0.2 for almost a year now. So a lot of people's question was, is this official release actually better in some way? Does it run faster? Does it have better image quality? And that was one of the big questions I got after my first video. Reminder that my first video, it didn't compare the old leaked version to the new version. I was just comparing official releases to official releases. So in that version, I was looking at the FSR 3, which was what had been previously officially available, to FSR 4 with the now officially available version. And just as summary, my conclusion in that video is that while FSR 4 runs slower than FSR 3, same thing as on RDNA 4 GPUs, as we're seeing here on the RDNA 3 GPUs, so you have to use a more aggressive setting in order to match the performance. On FSR 3, the overall image quality is still better despite using the lower internal resolution to get the same performance. In this freeze frame, we can see that on FSR 3, there's a lot of disocclusion and motion fizzling on the character's arms and legs in motion. The tree leaves and things leave a lot of detail left out of the image. Again, you can look at objects in the distant detail. There's just less detail, more breakup, more fizzling. And the newer version, despite having to be set to a more aggressive setting to match the previous performance levels, you see the character's arms in motion are a lot more put together. The legs are more put together and solid. A lot of this, if you look at the tree leaf details and things like that, we get a lot more detail reconstructed, and it holds up a lot better in motion as well. Now, keep in mind that you're watching a YouTube video, which has compression, plus there's the recording I did, which has its own compression and all of that. So, you can see a lot of this through the YouTube video, but maybe not all of it. Now, another thing I noticed, like the shadows breaking up here, being very stippled looking on FSR 3, being a lot more solidly put together and correct on FSR 4. So overall, this is a very good upgrade to have. It's a lot more usable than FSR 3, even if you do have to, use a slightly more aggressive setting in order to get the same frame rates you had previously. So that's a summary of the previous video. All the testing, by the way, has been done on an RX 7800 XT. But like I said, in this video, I'm going to compare the old leaked version to the new version. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because AMD themselves actually made some claims in their announcement video. I think possibly trying to explain, they didn't phrase it this way, but the fact that they addressed the community mod version, this is a frame from their announcement video, I think to me is trying to have them explain why it took almost a year from getting the community leaked version to getting the official release. They seem to be suggesting that they took additional time to improve the performance and optimization of the technology. So that's one thing we can look for in our video is it true that the new version runs faster? So they made their claims based on an RX 7600 at 1080p. Now, I'm using an RX 7800 XT for my testing, at least currently. I'd love to test more GPUs, but do keep in mind that I didn't get early review access to this, so I'm just having to put together what I have time for and release it as I have it. So I'll continue to do additional testing as I have time, but my testing started with the 7800 XT, and I'm continuing using that GPU so I can double down on the testing I already did for my initial video, and then just keep following up on that and building additional comparisons. So anyway, they're claiming that on at least RX 7600 at 1080p, they don't seem to be clear about which upscaling setting they're using, whether it's quality or balance or performance. They're getting 68 FPS average in Forza Horizon 6 versus 73 FPS average when using the official released 4.1 version. Also, if I go a little bit further back in their video here, they also claim that they went from 59 FPS average to 63 FPS average when using the official version versus the modded version in Crimson Desert. Now, unfortunately, the video they released on X seems to have pretty terrible image quality. So they mention optimizing the performance and image quality and such. It's hard to make anything out of their video, though, image quality-wise. So let's talk about that and how we'll use my testing to take a look at this. So I did capture video feed. Now, one note on that, though, is because I'm also looking at performance metrics, not just the image quality, that means that I'm capturing at an unlocked frame rate, but I'm capturing 60 FPS video through an HDMI capture card on a second PC, which means that the gameplay frame rate is out of sync with the 60 FPS capture, so you could see screen tearing at times in the captured video. That's a capturing artifact that wouldn't be visible in person on a variable refresh rate display, or even on a fixed refresh rate display if you used VSync. So ignore any screen tearing artifacts as part of the image quality comparison. Also, same thing with just the appearance of smoothness to the video. Instead, what we should be looking at is actual upscaling quality, things like disocclusion fizzle, ghosting, just the sharpness and detail present on objects. Those are the types of things that you should be looking for visually. And then we're also comparing performance, because again, AMD is making some claims that their new version took longer to come out because they did additional optimizations compared to the leaked version that the community has been using for a while. Also today, a lot of my testing is still using Clair Obscure Expedition 33, but I have also tested some additional games, including the games that AMD mentioned in their improved performance claims. I have looked at Crimson Desert, and I've looked at Forza Horizon 6, as well as Resident Evil Requiem and Pragmata. But since I already had a ton of testing for the 4.1.1 version in Clair Obscure Expedition 33 for my first video, that's the one that's going to have the most tests, where I look at the most resolutions, 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, as well as all of the upscaling settings, performance, balanced, quality, native resolution, all of that. So it's not just Clair Obscure, but our first chunk is going to be Clair Obscure, and it certainly has the most testing, just because I can double up on the testing I did for my previous video, which is also why I'm still using a 7800 XT, because that's what I used in my initial video. So here we're looking at 1080p performance level upscaling. I do think when I look at the image quality, I do see some differences. I'm noticing some differences in the like the leaves on the trees, etc. I think that the 4.1.1 does look a little bit sharper, but that can also mean that occasionally I feel like there's a little bit less temporal stability, I think perhaps due to that increase to the sharpening. Performance-wise, I'm seeing 88 FPS versus 87. Realistically, that's kind of within margin of error. Another difference I'm seeing, at least in some scenes, is maybe the polka dots on her shirt come out a little bit sharper and more defined in the 4.1.1 version. It's a little hard to say. It can vary moment to moment. Maybe a little more sharpness and detail to the to like the flowers on the ground. Again, it can be hard to say. You guys can make up your own mind in the comment section. Although compression artifacts, etc., we can just do what we can do. I'll say that it doesn't appear to be a massively improved image quality or anything compared to the mod, and it's also not a huge difference in frame rate. It's kind of within margin of error, to be 100% honest. Now I'm switching to the balanced level upscaling, still with a 1080p output, and now I'm seeing literally the same performance, at least on average by the end of this benchmark run, averaging 83 FPS on both GPUs. Again, maybe some of those same image quality differences. So really it looks very similar image quality-wise to my eye. The differences are maybe a little bit sharper on the 4.1.1 image. At least that's kind of what I'm seeing to me. The quality level upscaling with the 1080p output, I'm now actually seeing the old version hit 79 FPS versus 78 on the new official release. So at least in this case, I would say that it kind of came out as a wash performance-wise for at least a 7800 XT at 1080p resolution in this particular game. I didn't really see a majorly noticeable performance benefit. Now switching to 1080p at native anti-aliasing, so this is full 1080p resolution, but using the different upscalers for anti-aliasing, I'm seeing 61 FPS average on both. So like I said, at least at 1080p in Clair Obscure Expedition 33 on a 7800 XT, I can't validate AMD's performance improvement claims at least on this particular game at this particular resolution on this particular GPU. Now at 1440p now, starting with the performance mode upscaling, I'm seeing 72 FPS on the new version versus 71 on the leaked old version. So, small frame rate advantage, but again, 1 FPS, it can be margin of error on the test runs, because again, this is just a manual test run running through a section of a game. So there can be slight run-to-run variance. Now, switching to balanced level upscaling, I'm getting a 66 FPS average on both the old version and the new version. Like I said, there are very minor differences to the actual image quality that we're getting. I do think her polka dots stand out a little bit sharper and more defined on the new version. I think some of the details on the fountain in front of us, the sculpture, maybe pop a little bit sharper on the 4.1.1. Switching to quality level upscaling with the 1440p output, we're seeing 62 FPS versus 61 FPS. So that, again, I will say that even though sometimes the difference is just margin of error, it does seem to be more frequently in favor of the newer version. So perhaps perhaps that overall as an aggregate is a sign that there is some additional optimization there, some additional performance to be had. But again, switching to native AA, with the 1440p output, I'm seeing 43 FPS average on both the old version and the new version. But again, this could be something that shows up more on a game-to-game basis. So remember, I did test out some other games, and it's going to be worth looking at those, especially the games that AMD made their claims based on. So don't judge yet. We got some more testing to do. But at least in Clair Obscure, switching to 4K, we're again seeing a 1 FPS advantage to the new official version. This is 4K upscale performance settings. So performance mode with a 4K output, 48 FPS versus 49. But again, that 1 FPS advantage is in favor of the official release. So there is that. Like I said, there's some minor differences to the image quality. I do think I prefer the official release, but it's very, very small differences. Switching to the balanced level upscale with a 4K output resolution, it's now 43 FPS versus 42. Once again, that 1 FPS advantage is in favor of the newer version, so maybe some small sign of some performance optimization there. And again, this is just on the 7800 XT. AMD was making their claim based off of the 7600, so maybe on that GPU the performance differences are more noticeable. Now here we're at the quality upscale with the 4K output, and I'm seeing 38 FPS on both GPUs, so looking pretty similar. I'm also trying to look at the reported, not just VRAM allocation, but VRAM per process usage, which is the middle VRAM number. And it's looking pretty close, but not exactly identical. Here we're looking at 4K with native AA, so native 4K, and I'm seeing 24 FPS on both. Maybe a few megabytes more efficient in VRAM allocation on the new version. So I'm struggling to find major differentiators in this game using this GPU. That being said, I did go ahead and test out Forza Horizon 6, which is one of the games AMD made a claim about. And notice that in this game, I'm actually seeing a 6% advantage, 102 FPS versus 96 FPS for the officially released version. So that's a little bit more interesting. Now, I'm also looking at the reported VRAM per process usage, and it does look a little bit lower on the official release. There can be sometimes I've noticed some run-to-run variance on that though, so I don't want to make too strong of a claim about that, but it's possible that they're slightly more VRAM efficient with the official version. That's just, maybe the case. But definitely noticing a more pronounced performance benefit, and this is one of the games that AMD highlighted. Now, it's possible that I've noticed that Forza Horizon 6 I think can be kind of memory bandwidth sensitive, especially compared to some other games from a performance standpoint. So it's possible there that, maybe it's certain games and their performance profiles benefit more from the optimizations here. Now, with that being said, the previous test was at the extreme settings. Here I switched to extreme plus ray tracing. Both of these tests have been at 1440p with a balanced upscale. And here I'm actually seeing 62 FPS on both GPUs. And now I'm not seeing in that per process usage the same advantage on the VRAM that I was seeing before. Again, there can be some variance to that run to run. So guys, I'm really looking for those advantages that they're claiming here. And I'm not seeing a lot here. Now, maybe they're now bottlenecked by the ray tracing accelerators as opposed to the memory bandwidth, which maybe was the bottleneck when we weren't using ray tracing. So I'm wondering if that's where we're seeing that difference. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating on why we're seeing the difference between these settings and the previous settings. Another game that AMD made their claims based on was Crimson Desert. Now, I'm not testing the same scene of the game that they tested, but using 1440p ultra settings with balanced level upscaling. Here, I'm seeing 78 FPS versus 77, so slight advantage there. I'm also looking at image quality. I think maybe I'm getting a little more detail in the grass blowing in the wind. I don't know. I'm looking for stuff. If there is a difference, I think my eye slightly prefers the official released 4.1.1 version. But yeah, there's not a whole lot difference here. Another game we looked at was Resident Evil Requiem. This is also 1440p. I guess I forgot to write that in the description, but this is 1440p with balance level upscaling. This is the max setting plus RT high, and I'm seeing 72 FPS on both versions. Again, this is another case where when I look at the VRAM per process usage, it does look a little bit lower on the official release, but I haven't been seeing that in every test that we run. And like I said, there can be some run-to-run variance I've noticed on how VRAM usage and per process usage and allocation reports game by game. Again, you can be looking at image quality differences, things like that. They really do look broadly very similar. Here, I turned off ray tracing and switched to the normal preset, and now I'm seeing a slightly more pronounced advantage, but it's only 2% and 115 FPS versus 113 FPS. So, and like I said, this is a manually done benchmark run, so there is some run-to-run variance on performance. But again, when we are seeing variance between the two versions, it does seem to tend to favor the new release, indicating potentially some optimization. We're also looking at, again, seeing a little bit lower per process usage on the VRAM allocation. I'm trying to freeze frame here to see if we can see, upscaling differences in the hair or anything like that, but they do look broadly very, very similar between the two versions. Another game that I looked at is Pragmata. It looks like I also forgot to type it out, but this is 1440p resolution, still doing balanced upscaling. This is the highest graphics preset in the game, which is named Quality and has RT on by default. Here I'm again seeing a slight advantage to the new fully officially released version at 102 FPS versus 101. But again, that's only a 1% advantage. But when I'm seeing the advantage, it does seem to be in favor of the officially released version. Still trying to look at image quality differences. If they're there, they're very minor. I'm trying to look at like the character's hair and, distant details, disocclusion, things like that. I do think the 4.1.1 just has overall a slightly sharper look to it. We could try to freeze frame a few times, maybe see if we can see any differences in the hair. It can be a little hard on a manual benchmark run to get exactly matched up footage, so that's another, limitation to the testing. But yeah, I'm not seeing major differences from either performance or image quality perspective, at least in these tests that I'm running here. If I turn off the ray tracing and switch to the balanced graphics preset, which is one notch down in the settings menu, this is still 1440p output with a balanced level internal upscaling resolution. I'm seeing a 2% lead now for the official release, so 121 FPS versus 119 FPS, so rounds to a 2% lead. Now, this is one of the cases where I'm looking at the per process usage on the VRAM allocation and not seeing a major difference, and if anything, it's slightly higher on the right-hand side, so I'm not sure I'm seeing a consistent enough difference in that regard to try to make any calls about optimization improvements in that particular capacity. So yeah, I've been trying to find these optimizations. The biggest one I saw was in that Forza Horizon 6 test, and these were all the tests I was able to run in time for today's video. So overall, my thoughts are really that I think the biggest advantage you're getting from this official release is just convenience. The fact that you can just do the driver level toggle in the official software without having to drag and drop a DLL file into game folders or use Optiscaler or things like that is a huge win in terms of convenience. So I think for the end user who is already using the modded version, the main advantage here seems to be convenience. It's maybe slightly better in image quality in some regards. It certainly at least looks sharper. And I will say that there does seem to be some performance advantage, but at least on a 7800 XT in the games and settings and resolutions that I tested, it seems to frequently show up as only a 1 or 2% improvement, not particularly noticeable, but there was at least this one case where it seemed to be a little bit of a more major advantage. And Forza Horizon 6, I do notice, has a very different performance profile between graphics cards than most games do. Something about this game or this engine seems to scale differently. Like I said, I could speculate that perhaps it's memory bandwidth related, so maybe the way that they're, maybe that's what some of these claimed optimizations target. But I will certainly say that if they're trying to imply that, you know, they just couldn't release this earlier because it just required these huge levels of optimization, and if they're implying that you're going to see this level of improvement on a regular basis, I'm certainly not seeing that in my testing. However, that there is a difference that they're looking at the RX 7600, potentially the 8GB version. So maybe if they were looking at an 8GB card where if there was any VRAM optimizations made on the newer version, maybe the difference between spilling over 8GB versus not could be something that they're noticing here. I don't know, I'm just trying to speculate. They also say that they ran a lot of testing to make sure it works properly, etc. But anyway, I don't know if I can validate that this was some huge advantage compared to the previously available version, but I will say that the main difference is for people using officially released software. The difference between previously only officially having FSR 3 versus now having access to a version of FSR 4, this seems to be a huge improvement to your daily use case. And for those of you who were going out of your way to use the modded version already, this is at least an improvement to your convenience. So it is nice to have it now, and it's better late than never. I do think it is certainly annoying how long it took them to get this officially released, though. But like I said, better late than never. At least it has finally happened. Now, as far as future testing goes, I know that there's some interest in looking at the 4.1.1 officially released version that's int 8 that runs on these 7000 series cards, and doing kind of an image quality comparison with the 4.1.1 that works on the RDNA 4 cards, because that's using FP8. So is the image quality as good? Because AMD's said things like comparable, but they don't promise exactly the same, because it does have to be, there are differences to the model and how it's running. So that could be something you could look at in future videos. I'm also interested in doing like updated, like, you know, 7800 XT versus RTX 4070 now that we have because that's certainly a different look now. These 7000 series cards are potentially more interesting on the used market now that we have better upscaling easily available in an official capacity. So that could be worth looking into those kinds of comparisons. Anyway, hopefully you guys found the testing I was able to do useful and or interesting. Like I said, there's certainly more to test out here, but I'm just kind of releasing stuff as I go, since didn't have time to put together a like full complete review in time for the release date, since they released, chose to just kind of go ahead and release when it was ready, which is fine, but that's why this is kind of having to break up into pieces. All right, hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.